最初のセッションのモデレーターを務めさせていただきます、ラジオ局日本放送で、朝の番組 OK 工事アップという番組のパーソナリティをしております飯田浩司と申します。どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。そしてオープニングセッション、今ご紹介いただきました3人の方々パネリストとしてご登場いただいております。まずは私の隣からご紹介いたします情報戦略アナリスト山岡鉄秀さんです。よろしくお願いします。
よろしくお願いします。
そしてオープニングからご登場いただいておりました、CPAC Japan JCU 議長の饗庭浩明さんです。よろしくお願いします。そしてアメリカ CPAC 議長のマット・シュラップさんです。よろしくお願いします。私去年もですねこのオープニングのところで、モデレーターをやらせていただきました。思い出すのはその時に、共和党のキャンディデートトランプさんがまずは、正式に選ばれたその直後でまだランニングメイト、副大統領候補が誰なんだというのが全くわからない中でですね、マットさんにそれをいろいろ根掘り葉掘り聞いた覚えがあるんですけれども、まずはマットさんおめでとうございます。
What did I say?
特定の名前は言わなかったと思います。僕が誰っていろいろ聞いたんだけど結局っておっしゃってた。
So you want me to talk?
Yeah.
Go? Well, he made a great pick in J.D. Vance. Outstanding, young, smart person who came into politics from the outside. I don't know if you all read his book. I don't know if it was translated into Japanese, but I'm sure it was. An amazing story about a poor kid who beat all the odds and went to one of our top universities and became a senator. And has a beautiful young family and stands for all the right things. You know, when you go into J.D. Vance's Senate office, he doesn't have his vice presidential office yet. He's kind of a different kind of Republican. You don't see a lot of CEOs, and you don't see a lot of the elite. You see a lot of just people who are what we would say ordinary Joes. Not Joe Biden, but ordinary Joes, average people, working people. And J.D. Vance represents the shift in the Republican Party, which is our careful center-right party in America. We have a two-party system. But the J.D. Vance is part of transforming that party, which would have been considered a party of wealthy people. We call them the country club set. And this shift from doing what maybe the wealthy in society wants to do to actually rethinking that and doing what the working class people want to do. 2/3 of Americans don't go to college. They don't go to and get kind of advanced degrees. They have to provide for their families quickly, and they start working, and they need a trade. And somewhere along the line, there was a snobbery that people that worked for a living or had a trade were not as valuable political supporters as people who could write large checks. And the weird thing that happened, even though the Republican Party was seen as the party of the elites and the wealthy gave all their money to the other party. You think about all those billionaires and everyone else that runs these big tech companies, minus Elon Musk, almost all of them were feeding the left in our country. So they kind of deserve what came their way.
さあ、山岡さん、ね、日本から見ていてもやっぱりね、なんかアメリカを取り戻す、昔安倍さんが日本を取り戻すっておっしゃったのと同じようなところがあるように見えましたがいかがですか？
そうですね、今日は飯田さんがいるから楽です。ありがとうございますまずマッツさん3度目のトランプさんの当選おめでとうございます。
Third.
3回目ですからアメリカとしてはですね、今おっしゃったように、本来のアメリカに戻っていく、アメリカファーストということですよね。アメリカ第一主義ということで、トランプさんとしては、トランプチームとしては内政に集中していきたいだろうと思います。しかしですね、この、バイデン政権下で アメリカの国力は、かなり既存した権威が喪失したという部分もありますが、アメリカは依然としてスーパーパワーなわけですね。ですからこの国内のこのドメスティックなことだけじゃなくて、この海外のさまざまな事象にもですね、これ関与せざるを得ない、その関与することをまた期待されているわけです。このバランスどう取っていくのかということですね。これまず最初にマッツさんにお聞きしたいんですね。
Is that back to me?
Yes.
I'm very popular this morning, Jay. This race in America, this presidential race, I believe it was always Donald Trump's to win. It was Donald Trump's to win, not because of foreign affairs, but foreign affairs did play a role. It was Donald Trump's to win because everything the Democratic Party, our left-wing party in America, the Democratic Party, by the way, it's falsely named. It has nothing to do with democracy. It fights democracy in every way. But we'll get to that later. So the Democratic Party in America didn't have one single solution to any American voter, not a single solution. Their solution was we should teach your kids that they're one of 62 genders. Their solution was you should have more crime on your streets because we hate cops. Their solution was the military would have greater lethality if the military focused on the sexuality of the soldiers instead of their ability to be fighting men and women. They had insane answers to every question that faced the American people. And the problem with that is their policies are what drove inflation. I know we had inflation all over the globe, but it was for similar policies. The federal government spent money at such a rapid clip that a $2 trillion deficit, an annual deficit, was something we had to start to learn to accept. We have our level of indebtedness in America is catastrophic. I don't know if we can ever get out of it. And that's usually an economic thing that the voters would say, well, how does that affect my life? Well, they could see how it affected their life as eggs and bread and peanut butter and milk were so expensive, they couldn't afford it. So at the end of the day, Donald Trump won because he had answers. Donald Trump won because his economic policies worked, Joe Biden's didn't work. But the third thing that had a huge impact was this J.D. Vance Republican. They're the ones who joined the military. They're the ones who do the fighting. And to watch Joe Biden take the prestige of the American people and America and orchestrate that disastrous pullout out of Afghanistan, and for Vladimir Putin to believe that he can do anything he wants because Joe Biden is so weak, and for the terrorists in the Middle East, in Iran, and in these terrorist organizations to believe that they could basically launch an attack on Israel with no ramifications because America was that weak. That scared the hell out of the American people. 2 wars in 2 continents, no plan to resolve the wars, all the pressure on Israel to give in, no pressure on that little guy Zelensky who won't even put on a tie, for him to go to the peace table and try to hammer out peace. I believe, we're not going to solve the problems in the Middle East magically, but I do believe this war in Ukraine is coming to an end because the money's going to come to an end. And that'll force the European leaders to try to resolve the issue. But I would really say at the end of the day, the reason why Donald Trump won a 3rd time is because he had actual, common sense, practical answers to the problems that faced the American people.
ということはですね、その国内問題に集中しながらも当面インターナショナルアフェアーズ、海外の問題にも相当程度関与せざるを得ない、そういうジレンマというものは抱えながら走らなきゃならないと思いますか？
I don't know if he views them as 2 different things. I think he's going to govern our economic policies in a way that makes sense for his foreign policy. It makes sense for America to realize that China views America as an adversary now. And that's good because America for too long discounted China's aggression militarily. And now we understand it because we can see it through the economic consequences they're bringing the American people. And so I think a strong American economic policy matches this desire. By the way, my party doesn't really want the United States military to be everywhere. We don't want to be fighting everybody's war. We like it when we heard Prime Minister Abe talking about Japan picking up more of the responsibility for its own questions of national defense. That matches, but there's a lot great powers can do together if they cooperate on all those questions, and that's what you're going to see happening again. Donald Trump is going to cooperate with those leaders who are America's historical allies. No country more important than Japan. And I'll just say one thing, Jay, we just came back from Argentina, our first CPAC Argentina with President Milei. And President Milei said in his speech, we should translate it into Japanese so people can hear it. He said there's like 4 or 5 leaders on the world who are standing up for freedom and making a difference. And he believes they're all coalescing around the CPAC banner. If you think about it, those are the countries we're going into. So that's a great compliment to the work that we've all done to make sure that people understand that a lot of the work in these countries isn't done just inside the government, it's done with allied organizations outside the government.
はい、ありがとうございます。
中田さん、この CPAC いろんなところで広がってますけれども、もともとアメリカ以外でっていうのは日本が最初だったと。そこからもうすでに 7,8 年が経ちますけど、今現状、日本の政治の世界もご覧になっていかがですか。
日本の政治についてですか。
もう含めて、はい。
まず今回アメリカこのセッションのテーマに即して言うんであれば、アメリカの大統領選で今回またトランプが勝利したことによって一番僕が感じたこと、僕はアメリカの特に共和党との皆さんとの関わりがもう12年2010年以降なのですごく長くなるんですけど、やっぱ変わったなと思うんです。さっきマットが言ってた通りで、本来民主党っていうのはまさに国民主権、もう一人一人の国民のために、政治を行わなきゃいけない政党であるのに、全然名前の通りではない、もう本当にアメリカを支配するような動きをずっとしてきて、アメリカ国民を困らせるような動きをずっとしてきたのが民主党だったんですよね。でもそれに対して昔のトランプが登場する前の共和党はどうだったかというと、それはそれでですね、僕がずっと見ててやっぱ問題があったんですよ。理念とか価値観はすごく大事にするんだけれども、物言いがどうしても上からの物言いでですね、国民に届かないんですよね。けれどもトランプが登場して、そして多くのさっきマットが言ったように労働者を中心として、また中間層も中心として一気に彼らの一番困っていることについて見事な回答を引き出すという政策を実行したわけですよ。そのことによっていつの間にか民主党は結構労働者とかマイノリティの味方であったというふうになっていたものが、立場が逆転して共和党が本当に労働者とか中間層とか困っている人たちの味方になって、トランプのおかげでですよ。でまさに民主主義、国民主権ということをトランプの手によって取り戻すことができたと。民主党と共和党の立場がある意味逆転してしまったなというふうにも私はこの12年ずっとアメリカという国を見てて思いましたね。でもそれこそ本来の政治のあるべき姿だと思うんですよ。やっぱり政治を国民の手に取り戻す、これは今マットが少数の国で今やっとこれが始まったというけれども、実は日本でもそれを本格的に起こさなければいけない。このアメリカのこの8年間の動きを見て、多分多くの方々がすごく学ばれたと思うし、気がつかれたと思うんですね。アメリカのトランプの動きと照らし合わせてみて、なんか日本もおかしいぞということをトランプは身をもって私たちにいろんなヒントを与えてくれてるんじゃないかなと その意味でも今回のトランプの勝利はすごくアメリカの人たちのみならず我々日本人にとっても世界の人たちにとっても大きな意味があるものだったなと思います。
さあそのね、トランプ政権が、今後何をしていくのかというのが、今回のね、このトランプ政権移行チームが目指すアメリカと世界というテーマだと思いますけれども、内政の部分で言えばこれ一番最初1月20日にトランプさんの政権がまずは何からやりますか？
Well, day one. You know, my wife Mercy worked for President Trump for 4 years, and there's something about billionaires who are senior citizens. They want to act now. There's no waiting. So he's already talked about all these pardons he wants to give to the people that participated in the election protests. He wants to pardon them on day one. By the way, I think there's a couple of thousand people who have been convicted, and many of them are in prison. Steve Bannon went to prison. Peter Navarro went to prison. All over this question about you should only vote if you're a legal voter. You should show an ID if you're a legal voter. And we should be able to count those ballots on election night. And you should be able to know the winner that night, as they do, I believe they do in Japan, right? You don't have these problems in Japan. You have a good system. They have a good system in these European countries. They voted in over 30 countries for the EU parliamentary elections, and they knew the winners that night. And you know, the American people are frustrated that the people of France seem to be smarter than them. That makes them mad. How come America takes weeks, and in France they know by midnight? So he wants to do that on day one. He's going to have a bunch of executive orders on drilling for fossil fuels, which he calls liquid gold. Which he's right about. The people of Japan benefit from the fact that America has so much natural gas and other fossil fuels, coal, oil. We really kind of have everything. But the Democrats, once again, their solution to people paying high utility bills and high gas prices, high diesel prices, is we're going to make you pay higher prices because we're going to make you use quote-unquote green energy, which is a myth. And so he's going to take care of that on day one. And he's going to close the border. Now, immigration is something that you cannot properly describe its importance in our politics. You can't describe the kind of, I'll say this, baseball analogy, the screwball effect on our politics because of immigration. A lot of people on the left who would have reliably voted Democrat hated the idea that millions of people streamed into America who were violent, who were unsafe, who have no intention of helping our country, who just want to sponge off our government programs, and potentially destabilize us militarily, as they came from 150 countries, including countries dominated by terrorism, including people coming from China and other places. So this really changed the politics of our country dramatically. Europe has this problem too. I'm not as aware of, maybe I'll learn what the politics of immigration are in Japan, but most sane democracies have borders. They're not closed, they're regulated. You only let the people in who are allowed to come in. Jim, how many places did we have to stop to show our ID on the way to Japan? I think it was like 5 times. And every time I thought, why am I staying in another line to show my passport? I was like, how smart. You have to actually have a process to come into your country, and that's the way it should be. And in America, you just need to understand anybody at any time under Joe Biden could get into America. You can come through Canada, you can come through Mexico, you can come from every corner of the world. Basically, nobody was detained, because the way Joe Biden interpreted our rules was that you basically would be allowed in, and maybe some point in the future, we would make a legal determination if you could stay. Think about that. 15 million people, the size of Tokyo, were led into our country at a minimum, probably much higher, probably more like 25 or 30 million, led into our country. My state that I come from is like 3 million people. 15 million people, by Joe Biden's own estimation, which is way too low, came into our country. We have no idea who they are. And that made a massive difference in our politics. So on day one, the border won't be closed on day one, but it'll be substantially locked down after day one. Businesses will begin investing into energy again on day one. And I'll tell you one thing, just anecdotally. In America, the restaurants and the stores are full. After the election, everybody knows that economically, they're going to be better off. And they know they're going to be safer in the restaurants because the insanity of Black Lives Matter and all these left-wing protest groups, all that's over. The American people have rendered their decision on woke, and they realized woke was making them broke, and they want nothing to do with it.
すでにですね、その国境数千万人が渡ってアメリカ国内にいて、そしてどこにいるかわからないという状況において、それを
They have no paperwork. Think about it. No paperwork. You don't have to have one identifying piece of paper to get into America under Joe Biden.
で、how would you deal with it? そういう状況でどうやってクリーンアップしますか？どう対処しますか？
Okay, so the first thing is the President of the United States of America has to have a stern talk with the left-wing President of Mexico. And that worked very well previously in the Trump administration. And then you have to send your diplomats to those countries in Central America and keep everybody out of America until we've gone through the proper process. The big lie, the fallacy, is that somehow America has a quote-unquote broken immigration system. We don't have a broken, the system is broken, but it's not broken because of our laws, it's broken because they won't follow the laws. Now, I think there's some ways we could make it even tighter and tougher for people to get in. The second thing is we have to defund these NGOs. I'm Catholic. The Catholic charities, their role in facilitating all this illegal immigration is disgraceful. A lot of other Christian churches are involved in this as well. They make a lot of money off illegal immigration. When you come in like Tucson, Arizona, or these places in Texas that you read and see about, you are immediately given clothing, which they buy from the big box retail stores, so they're all for it. Then you're giving hotel, which everyone who owns the big hotel companies and everybody who owns hotels loves, because all the hotels in America are at capacity, which is why when you visit America they cost so much, because they're riddled with people who are there illegally, and the government gives them all this cash for all these rooms. The airlines put these people on flights. Think about this. After 9/11 in America, we all had to go through TSA and show lots of ID to get on planes. You come to America illegally, you show no ID. There's no process to get on the plane. The airlines facilitate you. They give you money so you can buy cocktails on the flight. When you get to the other side, they get concierge service. They cut in front of American citizens on the way on the plane, on the way off the plane. They're then given limos, buses, cars to get to these hotels. All of these corporations are in on this whole scam, and I believe Donald Trump's going to out them all. And for my church and others that have been profiting off illegal immigration, those days are going to be over.
いや、こんなにアメリカという国を傷つけておきながら、これ政権が変わったとしても、ある意味のうのうと生きていくわけですよね。これに対してトランプさん何か調べるとかしないんですか？トランプ政権として、今までこうやってきたことのアメリカへの既存に対して。
This is the whole question, okay? So people say, if Joe Biden hadn't pardoned Hunter Biden, that would have been fine. Donald Trump should have pardoned Hunter Biden, right? He's getting this advice again, which is turn the other cheek. And in minor things in life, that's a very good advice. But if we allow this collusion between the leftists, corporate America, and others to continue to get away with this level of law-breaking, why is it that only Republicans and conservatives go to jail? No Democrats go to jail. No Democrats in the Biden administration are in any ethics investigations. They're under no clouds. There's no Obama people that had to pay for any of their illegal doings. The Clinton family doesn't have to pay for their illegal doings. The only people who have to pay are people that come from the Republican Party or the conservative movement. My wife and I have faced this. If you stand with Trump, you go to court. And if you go to court in Washington, D.C. or New York City, guess what? You lose. And that's the state of justice in America. So I think Pam Bondi coming in as the Attorney General, she'll get confirmed, I'm confident. And I think if she gives the President the advice that we just have to turn the cheek and just kind of like give them all pardons and just go forward, I'll call her. I don't think she's going to give them that advice because I know her pretty well. But I'll call her and say that is the wrong thing to do, not because I'm a vengeful person, but this has to stop. They have to stop treating Trump supporters like they're criminals. And let me take it one step further. CPAC is going to endorse a bill that pays all those victims back for all their legal fees. Now, I don't know how you pay back the people that committed suicide because of the persecution, and there's been several cases of this. You can never pay a son or a daughter or a widow back for the loss of someone in their family who committed suicide because of politics. But we can make them whole financially for all the lawyers they've had to hire for all these cases. Look, in these cases in America, you get one case brought against you, it's $1 million right off the bat, just to defend yourself in these terrible leftist courts. So the way this will end is when one of them gets put in an orange jumpsuit, has to go to prison, and their family has to understand that political prosecutions and persecutions are un-American.
前山さん、これいろいろアメリカの中にも知己もいらっしゃると思いますが、やっぱりこういう流れ騒動の中で、訴追をされたりだとか、そういう結構厳しい目に遭った方っていうのも知り合いにもいらっしゃったりしますか？
さっき名前も出ましたけれども、今度また復帰するのかな、ピーター・ナバロという、有名な学者さんで、ホワイトハウスの隠れでトランプ政権の下で働いてた方、もう出てすぐに次閣僚になりますけれども、すっごくいい人でした。僕も直接彼と会ったんだけれども、気さくだし、いつもホワイトハウスにもスニーカー履いてジーンズで出勤してたんですけど、で物言いは穏やかなんですよ。で、そのくせ頭は切れて、他のちょうど1月6日の襲撃事件なんかあった時にも、彼はもう全面的にいかにトランプが正しいかということを言ってのけて、でもいろんな脅しに屈せず、その結果牢屋に入ったりはしましたけどね。戦う男はいっぱいいましたよ。スティーブン・バンノンもそうかな。スティーブン・バンノンはちょっといろいろ悪いこともしたのかもわからないけれども、彼も戦う男でしたね。けどそういった人たちが復帰して、これからのトランプの元のアメリカをもう一度取り戻すんだろうなと思うと、本当感慨深いです。
でも今の松さんの話の中でも、報復じゃないんだと、ある意味法のしっかりとした正義を取り戻すんだという、そこの部分はやっぱりトランプさんあるいはその周りの人たちぶれないっていうところなんですか、松さん。
Yeah, no, that's right. So once again, it's not about vengeance or retribution or revenge, getting back at someone. It's about just making them stop. And the way you make someone stop is they have to feel a consequence. I have 5 children, and I think I'm a good father. I don't know. You're gonna have to ask them. Jay can ask them if they think I'm a good father. But the only way you raise a child, there's the old admonition, spare the rod, spoil the child, right? Which if there's not a punishment for a child, they become a brat. And what's happened in the American political sense is the Democratic Party, the socialists, are a bunch of political brats. They take anything they want, they take all the money they want, many times corruptly, and then when they get caught, they want to say, well, it's just politics, and you should be the better person, and you should, turn the other cheek. And when we get falsely accused, we don't get caught of doing wrongdoing by and large. Trump didn't do anything wrong with all these court cases. He was brought to court because they feared he'd become the president again. By the way, they were right, weren't they? They were, I guess, smart in their own way to take him to court because they knew they couldn't stop him politically. But the point is, what are the consequences to these prosecutors that brought Trump to court in Georgia, in New York City, in Washington, D.C.? What are the consequences? Well, I want there to be a consequence. One of the things CPAC did this year, Jim O'Connell in the back was the lead person on this, is we hired monitors for these ridiculous, unsafe election boxes that are all over our country, you know, because of that virus that came from the Wuhan lab. They convinced the American people that the only way to vote was to vote when you didn't have to see anybody. So you would vote by paper and a mailed ballot into a box. There'd be nobody checking the box because you make each other sick if there be any human contact. We're still voting this way in our country. The insanity of this. And they're unsecured boxes in many of these states. So we hired monitors to watch these boxes. And if something strange happened, as soon as one of these people videoed somebody voting with a backpack full of ballots, and we put it up on Twitter, do you know what ended up happening? Can you guess? They stopped. You must hold people accountable. By the way, we've taken all that information, we've turned it over to the proper authorities. They probably don't want to do anything to prosecute people. They'll probably come up with millions of excuses to say they don't know how to prosecute those people, but we will follow up in each and every one of those cases. Now, why? Because I hate that person who was paid the money probably to, you know, vote about a backpack worth of ballots. No, if we don't hold them accountable, we're not going to have a democracy anymore. If we allow the Clintons and the Obamas and the Bidens and all these families of the left to be as corrupt as some of their family members are, we won't have a democracy left for my kids. Because when you allow them to corrupt the system so much, eventually you lose the whole system. And that's why we must hold them accountable, and we're going to.
子供に見せて恥ずかしくないってすごい日本人の精神にもこうグッと入るなっていうね感じありますけど、一個その法の正義を取り戻すんだっていう補助線を引くと、なんかトランプさんの政策この先って山岡さんちょっと見えてくるような気がしますね。
それは原点に変える当たり前のことをするということですよね。それはね、それは日本もそんなに人のこと言えません。はい、日本の選挙でもですね。日本は住民票がありますから自動的に投票の用紙を送ってきますよね。でもあれを持ってっても持っていけばチェックされませんね、 ID を。そのままできちゃいますよね。だから僕は飯田さんの代わりに行ってもですね、分かんないわけ。
飯田さんですかって言われて「はい」って言います。
そうです、はいって言って「そうです、アナウンサーです」って言えばですねそんなことも聞かれないですけども、だからそういう意味で日本も決して一言ではないんですよ。しかし先ほど、狂気というね、インサニティという言葉が出てきたように、このアメリカのその当たり前な、法の統治を超えた状態というのは、これはもう本当にもう経典同地なわけですよね。絶対あってはならないことなわけですから、それを原点に戻す、当たり前の姿に戻すということ。だからこれは本来そんなラディカルなことではないわけ。でもそれをものすごい命がけでやらなきゃいけないというところにですね、今のアメリカ社会の深刻さがあるわけですよね。しかし我々も日本もそんなに傍観できる状態ではありません。
トランプさん、4年の任期があると。この4年でまずはクリーンアップは完了しますか？
That's a great question. Donald Trump's one concern in running a third time was would he have enough time on the clock to make all the changes, and would the American people understand that it takes a little bit of time for some of these things. Like with inflation, once inflation, this thief in the night is let out, it's very hard to stop it. You can stop it. It takes real determination, but it takes time too. So all these questions take time. I mean, I would ask you all, does Xi realize that he's going to have to change his act? Does Putin realize he's going to have to change his act? Does the EU realize they're going to have to change their act? Does the UN and the WHO, hopefully the WHO will be defunded by America and will pull out, but will they all realize, how fast will they get it? I will say this, the best news for Donald Trump is that this is the sequel. So they've already seen what he'll do for 4 years. And the difference last time when I would talk to CEOs and others is I would try to explain to them that Donald Trump is not lying to them. He's going to do these things. And they'd be like, there's no way he's going to do these things. I was like, no, I think he's going to do these things. He's been talking like this for 25 years. And he's serious about it. And they thought he was an entertainer. They thought it was like a joke. And no one thinks it's a joke anymore. So I have a feeling world leaders, CEOs, heads of big NGOs all realize that he's going to do the same policies he did before. This isn't a joke. He's not entertaining people, although we have a lot of fun watching him do this along the way, especially the dance and everything else is a lot of fun. You don't know what I'm talking about, do you? Okay, that was good. That was pretty good. That was the beginning of the dance. But that's right, Jay. So I think it could work in 4 years because I think people realize they have to change their behavior quickly if they want to do business with him.
ちょっと聞きたいんだけど、トランプがこれから大きな仕事を、本当4年間でやり遂げられるかどうかってみんなも見守っているんですけれども、結構今回の選挙が終わった後にその政策をトランプが実行する前のことで、いやいやトランプが選挙に勝っちゃったからアメリカで内戦が起きるんじゃないのということを結構みんな心配している人たちもいて問い合わせもあるんですよ。で僕は今回圧勝したあれだけの勝ち方だったので民主党の人たちも納得して内戦みたいにはなりにくいかなという気もしているんだけれども、この投開票も11月の6日ですぐに結果が出て、でもう非常に静かにスーッと民主党の人たち引いていったようにも思うんですよね。この引き方が逆に静かすぎて怖いなっていうふうにも思ったりするわけです。1月の20日までにトランプがもう一回暗殺されるんじゃないかみたいなことを心配する人もいます。トランプの暗殺とか、それからもちろんいつまでもそういう心配あるかもしれないし、アメリカでこれから民主党のこの反逆というか言い方悪くて申し訳ないですけど内戦が起きるかとか、その辺の読みについて何かマットは見解ありますか
？Yeah, so we were in a civil war. Now, probably wasn't as big as the big bloody civil war we fought back in the 1860s, but we were in a civil war. You couldn't come out of your house in our nation's capital. You couldn't come out of your house and go to a restaurant in Washington, D.C. without being accosted by these thugs from BLM. They'd make you raise your fist. If you didn't raise your fist, they would, destroy your dinner. Now you can say, well, they weren't shooting everyone yet, but how close were we, right, to having more violence? We have the example of George Floyd and his death, and what's funny is the left doesn't talk about George Floyd anymore. They took down all these statues, they put up murals and likenesses of George Floyd. They never talk about him. It's almost like it never happened. But there was violence in America starting at Trump's inauguration in 2016. Did you go to that? Did any of you go? Well, it was a scary time. It was the first time at an inauguration that they had roving bands of people doing violence to Trump supporters, to people wearing red hats. I was at the White House the day that my wife and I, the day that the Republican convention occurred at the White House, and BLM and Antifa and these groups had surrounded the White House perimeter, and then they went after everybody who left the White House grounds. We were victims of that. When you don't have police and the left-wing mob believes that they'll get away with anything, and Kamala Harris got them all out of prison. If any of them were arrested, she got the bail money for them the next day. Think about that. What a terrible person. And so if you think about the violence that occurred in the country, more property destruction during the reign of terror of BLM back in 2020 than all the hurricanes, all the earthquakes, all the tornadoes, all the natural disasters in previous years. And that period of time, because they were told by the mayors and the police chiefs of our major cities, which by the way, Tokyo is so beautiful, so orderly, so clean. I mean, in America, we don't have one big city that's even close to Tokyo. How sad is that for my country, this great country, which is, every city is run by a communist. And they allowed these left-wing radicals to do great damage to people. And by the way, people are not signing up to be cops in these cities because they know that the mayor won't support them in doing this. So I guess I would say back to you, Jay, that I think we're, in a certain extent, in a civil war. I know that we didn't feel safe as a family. We had threats against us. We had to hire private security people to be at my home. I had to install a gate. We had to install more electronic surveillance. I mean, it is very unsafe in my country to be a Trump supporter, to be a conservative, to be associated with CPAC. We've had the same problems at the offices. So at what point do I just have to acknowledge that my country has been destabilized by the left? Some of it from outside the country, some of it we've allowed to happen because our schools are the incubation labs for radical, crazy policies. And we have brainwashed our children into thinking that America is a racist country. And I can tell you that anybody who spends any time in America, which is a very racially diverse country, it is the furthest thing from a racist country. In fact, we have all kinds of people that feel very comfortable living there. The reason why they say America is racist has nothing to do with race. It's because they hate America. They hate the concept of America. They hate the concept of freedom. They hate the fact that it works so well when we hold close to those values. And they came so close to convincing the American people that America was a blight on the globe and we should be gotten rid of and we should start anew. And Barack Obama was the face of that movement when he said he was going to transform America. What he really meant is America's a crappy place and we should not be proud of it. And we're going to start it afresh. And Barack Obama's legacy, it's dead now.
そんな主張をしてた人が8年間大統領やってたっていうねことだったんですけど、そこにはやっぱり外国からのっていうのはあるのか。これ山尾さんはオーストラリアで中国の浸透に対してもう最初は孤軍奮闘で戦ってきたと。これアメリカに対してっていうのもやっぱりあるんですよね。
特にですね、注目したのが、前回2020年の選挙の時にですね、外国からの選挙干渉があったかどうかということはもちろん重要なトピックだったわけです。で、一応公式にはですね、なかったと、ロシアゲートとかそういうことを言われましたが、例えば中国からの干渉はあったのかと言われたらこれはないという報告だったんですが、なんと当時のラドクリフ長官はですね、自分でメディアに出てきて、そしてさらにこの公開書簡を出しまして、実は中国からの干渉はあった。しかしバイデン政権当時の、CIA ですね、その情報機関は、そのことをリリースしなかった。だから国家情報長官の責任において選挙干渉は外国の選挙干渉はあったと、そういう公開書簡を出したという、非常にこれ日本のメディアではねほとんど報じられてないんですけども、大変ショッキングなことがあったわけなんです。で、今回そのラドクリフ長官が CIA 長官になるというですね、大変このドラマティックな状況になってるんですけども、しかし、これまでの8年間はもちろん海外からのですね、特に例えば中国からのこの継続的な浸透影響工作というものについてどの程度認識されているか、危機感を感じているか、松さんに伺いたいですね。
Look, I think we live in a digital world, and Russia, China, North Korea, they're trying to bring down the tranquility of our society in America. They view us as opponents, and the American government has to be up to this challenge. I think it's outrageous that we've had government officials say that there was no overseas kind of infection or attempt to, fiddle with our politics. Of course they are. By the way, the American government does it in return. And most of that's clandestine and the American people don't know it, but that of course is happening. It wouldn't bother me if my government is trying to make sure there are free and fair elections in some of these communist countries. I think that's good. If they're destabilizing some of those regimes, I'm okay with it. And as the American, as we take over the American government with Republican officials, we need to make these regimes understand that if they mess with our elections, there's going to be massive consequences. And I think we've done a poor job of making them understand that. And I think Donald Trump will do a much better job of making sure he understands that. But I just want to say one thing, like for Jay Aiba and others, and for you two as well, for journalists and for others who said election fraud is a big problem, thank you, because it was a big problem. And it was very lonely in America. If you said that there was a substantial election fraud, you became you were basically blacklisted. You couldn't be hired. You were a conspiracy theorist. And now it's kind of funny, you know, Jay, people call my phone and they say, I actually don't think it's possible Joe Biden could have gotten 81 million votes. More votes than Barack Obama. And they don't really apologize to me, but they kind of half apologize to me. Like, well, maybe you were onto something when you said that you should have an ID to vote. And just so you know, when Jay and I travel around the world doing these CPACs on all these continents and everything else, I always ask how they do their elections. So it was interesting to hear your comments on what's going on in Japan. But you know, in Japan, there's real honor. If you're shown to be a liar, that's a terrible slur in your culture. And somewhere along the lines in America, you know, we've lost that idea that you should tell the truth. There's you know, the golden rule, we call it. You shouldn't mischaracterize these types of things. And we have massive election problems in a lot of countries because we've gotten away from common sense questions. And here's the thing. People say machines, not machines, this or that. Let me just ask yourself a question. If the hardcore leftists could fiddle with the results of elections in the major democracies, if the communists could get away with doing that, wouldn't they do it? Of course they would. Because I watched in my country where the communists used BLM and Antifa to burn down our cities, kill cops, destroy harmony in our major cities, so much so that when you visit our major cities, you don't feel safe, they smell bad, rampant drug use, tons of homelessness, people sleeping on the streets. If they would destroy all those people's lives for politics, what's a little cheating in elections? That's nothing compared to burning down buildings and destroying the harmony of these cities.
そういったモラルの低下ということがさまざまな局面で見られるわけですけど、マッツさんの観点からはそれはアメリカにおける
We're going to make morality great again, okay?
それはモラルの低下はキリスト教の衰退と関係あると思いますか？
Yeah, of course. America was founded by mostly Christian people, most of whom came from Europe, and we have to tell our story. And that's part of our story. For a few generations, we stopped talking about that because that was seen as theocratic, that was seen as colonialist, all these words that were thrown out there. But even people who aren't religious, who are more libertarian in their politics, they understand that a society will be much better if the people in the society tell the truth and care about their neighbor and live with decency. Now, we could have conversations about whether or not you have to be a Christian to fulfill that or not. In my travels all over the world, I've seen non-Christians be incredibly beautiful to their neighbors and care about telling the truth. I think there's a real spirit of this that I think isn't captured in my religious faith, but I also just think people of goodwill can adopt these policies. And they've somehow made that seem old-fashioned, out of fashion, to have these values. And I think it's the most important thing we can do with our children is teach them right and wrong. And each one of you is going to have your own view of what that means from a religious standpoint. But if you go back to the Greek philosophers, you go back in time, there was an understanding that your character was built by your actions. And your actions mattered. And that as people, we're going to be imperfect and we're going to make lots of mistakes. But what do you want to be known for? What kind of person do you want to be known for? That's what you have the chance to instill in the next generation. when you have these young people and they're teaching them things. And what we found in America, this is the saddest thing of all, we spend more money on our education than any other country on the face of the globe. We spend more money in the poor areas, trying so hard with our pocketbook to show that we care. And then we teach them that morality and faith has no role in education. We took all of that out, and then it was replaced by this crazy, woke, nihilism, insanity, which made a lot of these kids sad. We have school shootings that are off the charts in these schools. You read about it in America. We have more school shootings than any other country in the world. How is that possible? We have more kids that are on prescription drugs than any other country in the world. Almost all of our young boys are over-medicated. Now, the parents have the right to make these decisions. But why are the American young kids have to be so overly medicated when the rest of the world's children aren't as medicated? This is something RFK Jr. talks about. We have serious problems that have started with a school system that is off the rails, run amok, and brought great sadness to our kids. Why do we have such sky-high suicide rates with our young people in America? Why? There's no reason for these things. They have love, we have the resources. Maybe we're teaching them rotten lessons. Maybe we're teaching them all the wrong things. Maybe we don't have to teach them about sex in kindergarten and all the ways you can have sex. Maybe we should not do that. Maybe we should teach them to read and to understand history and to understand how to do math. But instead, we've taken all of this craziness of the Green New Deal and global climate change and transgenderism, and it has dominated all of the kind of like the ancillary and extra parts of education. It's dominated all of it. And, you know, it comes at a consequence. You all know this. You only have so much time in the day. A kid only has so much time to study in a classroom. And if you're going to do politics, left-wing politics, 30% of the time, they're going to come out dumber because they're not going to know very much. And they're going to come out angry because they hate the idea of a family and they hate the idea of America as a nation. And I'm hoping the most important thing that could happen is the result of Donald Trump winning, and there's so many things we've already talked about. But wouldn't it be great if our school system got out of politics and just taught our kids the basics that they need to be successful people in our economy? If we would do that, I think the kids would be a lot happier. And then look, on the faith piece of it, we should stop being hostile to churches. We should stop being hostile to synagogues. We should stop being hostile to faith. It plays a role in society. And we got all screwed up in America when we said there can be no faith in anything the government does. And once again, that was replaced with the left-wing crazy wokeism that took the place of faith, because that was somehow acceptable. But we need to get that out of everything, out of the military, out of the police force, and out of the schools immediately.
同じ問題が日本の国内にもあるなっていうのをすごく教育に関してというような感じでございます。時間がそろそろ近づいてまいりましたが、一つだけ聞きたいのはですね、今日、安倍昭恵さんがトランプさんと会うということが出てきております。で、一方で我が国の内閣総理大臣は全く会えない、電話も5分。このトランプさんの中で石破総理というものの存在、どう見てらっしゃるか、あるいは全くナッシングなのか、それも含めてお伺いしたい。これは難しい質問かもしれませんが、
言いにくいだろうね。
でも皆さんこれ聞きたいですよね。
ただ多分だけどマットはそもそも安倍さんってもうアメリカもそうだし世界中で有名だった。もう安倍さん生きてた頃はみんなが上院議員も下院議員もね、安倍さんに会いたくて、それが目的でこの日本にCPACに来てたようなところがあったんだけど、多分あと石破さんのことよく知らないんじゃないかと、そもそも名前も知らないんじゃないかぐらいにと思うんですよ。ただ僕のでいろいろ伝えてはあって、かなり左巻きなんだよとか、安倍さん後ろからこう打ちまくってたんだよってことは多分知ってるとは思いますけど、今のだから日本のこの政治状況、 自民党も本来だったら保守政党であるはずなのに、そうではない現状が、アメリカとこれからの日本との関係にどういう影響を与えていくかということについて、まとめの見解があったらそれはぜひ聞きたいです。
Well, I think your prime minister should call me. Maybe I can help him with his problem with President Trump. But I say that somewhat sarcastically, but I do think that when these world leaders are trying to figure out Donald Trump, they often talk to the wrong people, and sometimes the relationship goes in the wrong way. And there's really no excuse for that because the president enjoys talking to people who are in important jobs. He knows that America it has an important role in each one of these key countries, so I don't think it should really be that hard. I think I will say this, the whole world is coming to Donald Trump post his election. Jay was with us at Mar-a-Lago and could see it up close and personal, but you know how everything's happening in what they call the Mar-a-Lago living room there. He's having all these meetings. J.D. Vance is in one room. He's in another room. They have all these people interviewing for these cabinet positions. It was quite an experience to watch about how democracy works, right, Jay? And there's really no reason why someone can't have a good working relationship with Donald Trump. That you might get at odds along the way, and he'll be aggressive, and he should be because he's my president, and that's his job. But I think world leaders need to jump on the bandwagon, make phone calls, get on airplanes, get the meetings set up, and I encourage them to do it as soon as possible because, as you said, there's 4 years. It'll go fast. You can come to CPAC too. It's in February. You know, February 19th to the 22nd, and I think there'll be a lot of world leaders there, by the way. We had several last year. We had an international summit, and I think it'll be even bigger this year.
僕もラジオを通じて伝えておければ伝えたいです。
そうだから平たく言えば、
はい、
石破さんとかがもしトランプとパイプを作りたければここ CPAC を通じてやるのが一番ですよということを言ってます。
まあね、実際玉木さんだったりとか正学さんだったりとかいらっしゃるわけですから、なぜというのはね、ちょっと山岡さんも、
お誘いはしたんですけど、なぜか皆さんお断りになったと。
自民党だけで
自民党だけ
断ってきたということなので、これはもう本当に有識ことですね。ですからだからじゃあ自民党の役割は、歴史的な役割はもしかしてもう終わっちゃったのかと。もう正直言って我々有権者は真剣に考えなきゃいけない局面だと思いますね。まさに今日ここで CPAC があるわけですから、何も昭恵さんに期待し、昭恵さんには昭恵さんでやっていただきたいけども、ここに CPAC があってマッツさんが来てるんですからね。この機会をみすみす逃すというのは常識では考えられないことですね。
でも今のね、マトさんのお話の中で、中国だとか日本、東アジアのこの情勢に対して、アメリカが重要な役割を果たすんだって、それをトランプさんも十分にお分かりになっていらっしゃるというのはちょっと僕らにとっては心強いなというのがありました。今日のねさまざまなセッションの中で、各分野において、いろいろと掘り下げていくものというふうに思いますので、ぜひこの先もお付き合いいただければと思います。最後にセッションそろそろ終了になりました。皆さんへメッセージも含めて、お話を伺えればと思います。では山岡さんからお願いします。
そうですね、ちょっとこれはマッツさんにね質問する形で終わりたいんですけども、もう本当にもうトランプさんとこれはもう絶対ディールしなきゃいけないんですけれども、しかしトランプさんの方もですね、その同盟国、例えば NATO も含めてその関係を見直そうと思っていると思うんですね。その NATO から離脱するという考えを持っているという話まであります。その中で日本という国、日本政府にトランプさんは何を求めていると思いますか。じゃあちょっと簡単に教えていただけたらと思います。
Well, I mean, first of all, I obviously don't represent the president. He's got his own policies, and they're determining with his new cabinet if there's going to be changes in previous policies. There's been a lot of talk about having kind of like a NATO in this part of the world to replicate NATO. The problem with NATO in Europe is really not the concept of having it. The problem with NATO is the details. So You have this whole question of NATO was started post-World War II, but now it keeps expanding and expanding and expanding. What Donald Trump realized is, he's a businessman, so he has all these assets on his balance sheet. We'll probably have a lot of accountants here. I am not an accountant. I'll get this wrong, but I'm going to do my best to describe it. You have a lot of assets on your balance sheet. You have a lot of liabilities. And what Donald Trump realized is that NATO was growing in liabilities, right? And America was going to be kind of the bank that was going to have to pay all those liabilities. And he said, well, wait a minute. We have this huge debt in America. We can barely take care of ourselves. If China stops, buying our bonds and we have trouble managing our debt, and then all of a sudden we have a big conflict in Europe, economic or military, America can't possibly bail all those governments out. And he realized we have a massive problem because NATO was based on this idea that basically America would do everything, right? And we had this 2% rule. They all had to spend 2% on their military, and they weren't doing it. And so they were just assuming that the American taxpayer were going to do that. And he realized we had a massive balance sheet problem. And so I don't think he wants to expand the balance sheet problem by saying to every corner of the globe, don't worry, America will be there. Now, we kind of say that in our foreign policy, but it's not realistic. You can't be everywhere. You can't fight all these wars. You can't fight all these economic wars. So what he's trying to do is make it so that we have a setup where we have more peace, less war, and countries are more self-reliant. And the more they're always reliant on America in this modern context, it gets complicated. That being said, I do think that the people around Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, Tim Walz, and the others understand that China is a massive problem, and you guys are on the front lines. And my guess is what Donald Trump will do with the Japanese government and with other governments in the region, although it gets dicier and dicier, is ask them what do they need from America so that they can strengthen their own national identity, their own military, enforce their own borders, and encourage the bullies in the region, namely China, to understand there's going to be a consequence if they do something. I mean, I think the scariest thing is when you read about what's going on in this part of the world, is it seems war is more and more likely. I don't know what you all think about that, but it seems like that's a very scary prospect. And it seems like China shifted from just wanting to look like they were tough to now actually being tough and being belligerent. And that's not going to have a good consequence for the world if we stay down this path. So one of the most important things, I mean, Donald Trump, at the end of the day, one of the most important things he could be for the world is a peacemaker. Where peace occurs not because he's a sweetheart. Peace occurs because people fear that he'll take extraordinary steps to defend civilized people. And if we could have Putin and Xi and others and as he says, the little rocket man, if he could have them all understand that, the world will be a much, much better place for my kids and for your kids.
はい、ありがとうございます。
では相葉さんもお願いします。
これからのトランプがやっていく仕事ぶりというものをですね、ぜひ今日オンラインでも多くの学生さんも聞いてると思うんですけれども、ずっとウォッチし続けていただきたいんですね。で、大手のメディアはひょっとしたらフィルターをかけて変なことやってるっていうようなことをいろいろ言ってくるかもしれませんけれども、極力マットや私の方で、皆様の方にもうピュアなフィルターのないアメリカのこれからの仕事ぶり、そしてトランプ革命が起こっていく様を皆様にお伝えしようと思います。で、その中から何が人の心を動かしてこれだけの国民運動になってもうドツボにはまった4年間から奇跡のカムバックを遂げたのか、政治家というのはどうあるべきなのか。例えば7月13日の耳をかすめた暗殺事件もあったじゃないですか。で、あの時にもし自己保身の政治家だったらもう早く私を連れて逃げてくれって言いますよ。でも彼はシークレットサービスを押しのけて 聴衆に向かってファイトともう3回連続で声高に叫んだわけですね。どれだけそこに究極の事態に陥った時に人間というものの本音が現れるか、あれでイーロン・マスクも目覚めたような人物だったわけですよ。多分これから歴史の教科書というものがずっと世界で残っていくと思いますけれども、一つの大きな立志伝中の人物になっていくとは思います。なのでどうか日本でこれから新しい政治の変革を起こしていくときにも一つの参考として、僕はトランプが決して万能という気はありませんけれども、一つのモデルとして政治家というのはどうあるべきかということをぜひ学ぶ機会を私たち CPAC はずっと提供し続けていきたいと思いますので、ご期待いただきたいと思います。
ありがとうございました。ではマクさん、会場そしてオンラインでご覧になっている皆さんにメッセージをお願いします。
Oh, okay. I feel like I've talked too much, Jay. I've dominated here. But I would just say to the people listening, people here in the audience, that I believe that civilization's at stake in what's going on around the world. I really think we came very close to having these leftist forces dominate more and more of what we used to call the free world. And that's a very, very dangerous thing. I think once you lose freedom, you really don't get it back. Maybe you can, it almost takes a miracle. And I'm a religious person, so I believe that the American people, even those that would not consider themselves religious, were just asking a higher power to intervene to save America because it was that close. And they realized how evil these people are with their policies that are destructive. And I think you could see it even as far away in Japan. And I think when he got off the campus in Pennsylvania, people argue with me, was it a miracle? Was it an angel? Did the wind shift? What was it that caused him to turn his head right at the right time for them to put that immigration slide? It's ironic that that's what the slide was about. It was about immigration, which caused him to look at the slide. You know, how did it nip his ear and he went to the ground and then was able to have the stamina and the courage to stand back up, to yell fight, to walk off the stage, to continue to campaign, to not stop. A lot of people that would have made them scared and they would have stopped. He never stopped. He just kept going. It's the same fight determination that he had after 2020 when, I never said it at the time, but they really did rig and steal the election. I didn't use those words, but I think we can use them today because it's so obvious. He had the determination to not stop, to not cower, to keep fighting. He's a very, very unique person. And I believe that God gives us strange, interesting, unique people at just the right time to change history. Some people would say Prime Minister Abe was a person who was like that. He was the right person at the right time. Maybe he wasn't perfect, maybe he didn't make every right decision, but directionally, he helped wake up the Japanese people to what was going on around them. And we're very fortunate in America that Donald Trump's going to be the president. Now, the job of CPAC is to be his cheerleader, but also sometimes to be his conscience, and to also, you like that, and to also make the way for Trumpism to continue past Trump. 4 years of Trump is wonderful, but I'm just old enough, my hair is just wide enough, where I understand that 4 years goes by very fast. And we're not going to change the Constitution. He's only going to get 4 years. And we're going to have to elect somebody new. And the key is we have to win that race, and we have to keep these policies going. If we can give civilization a good 10, 12, 15 years to just defund, delegitimize, and put in prison all these people that are trying to wreak havoc all over the globe, I think the future for humanity is bright, and I am incredibly proud to work for an organization that is playing a central role in making sure that we're successful in this fight. And I'm incredibly proud to be here with all of you wonderful people in Japan. We are kindred spirits in the same fight. I'm really proud to be alongside my friends on this stage, especially Jay, who does such a good job of leading CPAC here in Japan. And just please know, you're not alone in this struggle. We're all facing similar versions of all the same struggles. And if we can do it in America, with a Republican Party that is often weak, you can do it here in Japan, and they can do it in these other democracies, and democracy really can spread, and we can create a civilization that we've never seen before. I'm incredibly hopeful about it, and we're going to get it done. Right, Jay?
ありがとうございました。この変革を目の当たりにして、そして私もラジオで少しでも伝えられればと、できればホワイトハウスとかね、行ってみたいな、送迎放送してみたいなと思ったりもいたします。さあ、今日のこの CPAC Japan 2024、最初のセッション、オープニングセッション、トランプ政権移行チームが目指すアメリカと世界、山岡鉄秀さん、相葉弘明さん、マット・シュラップさんでした。皆さん大きな拍手でお送りください。どうもありがとうございました。